You're not even supposed to be in this country." The words cut through the studio like a blade. Jasmine Crockett's voice, sharp and blazing with emotion, echoed off the walls of the dazzling studio. Red lights blinked, cameras zoomed, the panel froze. And Melania Trump? She just blinked slowly, not even flinching. Reporters gasped. One dropped their pen. Millions watching at home stared in disbelief as Jasmine pointed directly at Melania across the stage. "Let's call it what it is. Melania is an illegal immigrant who married her way in," Jasmine shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "This country bent the rules for her, and now she acts like she's better than the rest of us." For a moment, everything went still. Melania looked down at the folder on her lap. Her fingers moved slowly, gracefully. Then, without a word, she opened it and began to rise. The audience didn't know it yet, but what she was about to reveal would leave everyone speechless, including Jasmine herself. And what was inside that folder? What could possibly silence one of Congress's boldest voices on live TV? Melania Trump stood slowly, her face unreadable. The folder in her hands didn't look threatening, but her silence somehow felt louder than Jasmine's outburst. Across the table, Jasmine rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath. "Go ahead, prove me wrong." The cameras caught everything. Melania opened the folder and pulled out a document with a gold-embossed seal. Then another. Then a small, faded photograph of a young girl holding a tattered Slovenian flag, standing barefoot in the snow. "My story," Melania said softly, finally speaking. "Since everyone wants to speak for me, maybe I should remind them what I've survived." She held up a handwritten letter. "This is from the detention center where I was almost deported. I was 17, alone, hungry, terrified. But I didn't break any law. I fought to stay." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I didn't marry for a passport. I married for love, but before that, I earned my place." Jasmine's face twitched. The studio was dead silent. Even the audience watching at home began to shift uncomfortably. But Melania wasn't done. There was one more paper in that folder, and it was the one that would destroy Jasmine's argument forever. Melania slowly reached for the final page in the folder. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a photo. It was a court order, dated 7 years ago. A document showing Jasmine Crockett herself had once represented an undocumented immigrant in court and lost. Melania held it up to the cameras. "You once fought to keep a single mother in this country," she said quietly. "You cried for her, begged the court not to send her back to El Salvador. I know. I watched that trial." Jasmine's eyes widened. Her breath caught. "How?" she whispered. "How do you know about that?" Melania stepped forward. "Because that woman stayed in my guest house for 6 months after the government rejected her asylum. I helped her rebuild her life." Gasps rippled across the room. Jasmine stared, her lips parting, but no sound came. And then Melania leaned closer and whispered into her mic, "Before you accuse others, remember who we've both helped, or failed." And just like that, Jasmine's power vanished. But what the cameras caught next would take the story to an entirely new level. You could feel the temperature drop. Reporters lowered their microphones. One cameraman stopped filming, his mouth open. Melania hadn't flinched when Jasmine's insult hit. But now, she stood, spine straight, the studio lights catching the edges of her pearl-white jacket. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Would you like to know how I came here?" she asked, unfolding a single page from the folder. Jasmine scoffed. "Please, spare us the fairy tale." Melania looked directly at the audience, not Jasmine. "My name was Melania. I came from a collapsing village in Slovenia. My father died before I turned 15. We had no heat. I worked 2 jobs. My hands bled from scrubbing toilets in Vienna. A silence hung in the air. Not guilt, not pity, respect. I came here legally, alone. I spoke broken English and wore second-hand shoes, but I came with something more powerful than money or marriage. She lifted the paper. A letter from the embassy, she said. Dated 2 years before I met Donald. My work visa. Approved. Jasmine's smile dropped, but Melania wasn't done. The next thing she pulled from her folder had Jasmine's name on it. Melania carefully unfolded a second document, slightly creased, with a purple notary stamp in the corner. She held it up so the cameras could see. It had Jasmine Crockett's name printed at the bottom, and just above that, her signature. Jasmine blinked, confused at first. Then her eyes went wide. No, you're not seriously. Melania nodded. Yes, you co-signed this letter 3 years ago. You defended a woman in Congress who overstayed her visa. You called deporting her racist, cruel, and un-American. You said this country should honor the hard work of immigrants. Jasmine was frozen. So was the crowd. I agreed with you then, Melania continued. And I agree with you now. She stepped closer, voice still calm but sharper than ever. But tonight, you forgot your own words. You weaponized someone's journey to score a point. Jasmine tried to speak. Nothing came. One camera zoomed in, catching the slightest shimmer in Melania's eyes. You called me an illegal immigrant, she said. But I was exactly the kind of immigrant you once fought to protect. And then, softly, what changed, Jasmine? The question hit harder than the insult ever did. It started with one slow clap, then two. Then the studio erupted, not in chaos, but applause. From behind the cameras, reporters and producers, many of them immigrants themselves, stood in quiet support. Jasmine looked stunned. She had dominated a dozen debates before. She had torn down governors, clashed with senators. But this felt different. She wasn't fighting an opponent. She had shamed a survivor. A studio intern, barely out of college, whispered into her headset, "You've lost the room." Melania stayed still. She didn't smile. Her eyes stayed locked on Jasmine's. "I don't want pity," she said. "I want fairness. You want to debate policy? I'll be there. But don't erase what I've lived through." She stepped back. The moderator, who had been speechless for minutes, finally cleared his throat. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" But Jasmine didn't speak. Not because she couldn't, because in that moment, she didn't know how. She thought she came to win a debate. But she had just exposed something much deeper, and the internet was already exploding with reactions. But what Melania did next would flip the entire narrative again. Melania paused. The applause faded, but the silence stayed thick. Then she said it, gently, but with a tremble in her voice. "She lived in my basement." The moderator blinked. "Who?" Melania held up a photo, a grainy image of a middle-aged woman holding a small girl, both of them in worn-out winter jackets. "Sophia. She crossed the border with her daughter in 2002. She cleaned offices at night and hid from ICE during the day." Reporters leaned forward. "She never asked for help. But one winter, she knocked on my door at 2 a.m. Her daughter had pneumonia. No insurance, no home, no food." Melania swallowed hard. "I took them in. No cameras, no press, just humanity." Jasmine stared, speechless. The internet was already flooding with clips. Hashtags exploded. Her basement truth. Melania moments. She helped them. "And you know what Sophia said to me the day she left?" Melania asked quietly. She held up a handwritten note, shaking slightly. She said, "I wish more Americans were immigrants. Maybe then they'd remember how to be kind." The crowd sat in stunned silence, and then the moderator said something no one expected. The moderator, stoic, neutral, always composed, slowly removed his earpiece. He looked at Melania with something almost like awe, and then, out of nowhere, he spoke, not as a host, but as a man. "I know Sophia." Jaws dropped. Jasmine blinked in disbelief. "She cleaned the WRC building downtown when I worked my first internship," he continued. "I used to leave extra food in the break room. I always wondered where she went after midnight." Melania's eyes widened. She talked about the building. She remembered someone doing that. "That was you?" The moment cracked something in the room. Two strangers, unknowingly bound by an invisible thread of compassion and survival, now stood face to face on live TV. The moderator turned to Jasmine. His voice was low but firm. "When we argue politics, we must never forget the people behind the headlines." Jasmine said nothing. The camera cut to her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. Behind her, the teleprompter operator whispered, "Should we cut to commercial?" The producer shook his head. "No, keep it rolling." Because what happened next would turn political theater into something deeply personal. For the first time that night, Jasmine's voice wavered. Not from anger, from something deeper. Shame. "I didn't know," she muttered. "I didn't know your story. I thought—" She stopped as her own words choked her. "I thought you were a symbol, not a person." Melania said nothing. Her silence wasn't cruel. It was steady, patient. "You're right," Jasmine whispered. "I've defended immigrants, but I've also used them. Tonight I forgot what I used to believe in." Her eyes glistened. Her voice cracked. "This debate, it wasn't supposed to get personal." Melania folded her papers and gently said, "But people are personal. Politics should be too." A stillness filled the air, thicker than any applause. Then, slowly, Jasmine stood and said something no one expected. "May I see that letter?" Melania hesitated, then handed it to her. Jasmine read the fading ink, her eyes scanning the words written by a woman with nothing but dignity. And as she read, tears finally came. But the true twist, the one that would shake the entire nation, was still to come. Jasmine stared at the letter as if it had been written yesterday. Tears welled in her eyes, but she kept reading. Her fingers trembled. "This handwriting, it's shaky, but careful. It's like she was scared of being erased." Melania nodded gently. She was. Then Jasmine asked, voice cracking, "What happened to her?" The question hung like a thread in the air. Melania looked away, her expression changing. Her lips parted, but her voice didn't come right away. Then quietly, "She died." Gasps echoed. Even the sound tech froze at the switchboard. "She went back to Guatemala for her brother's funeral," Melania whispered. "She knew the risk, but she couldn't leave her family buried without her. At the border, they stopped her. She was detained for weeks. The conditions were inhumane." Melania's eyes filled. She didn't make it out. The studio went silent. Even Jasmine couldn't speak. Melania held up a final photo. It was of Sophia's daughter, now a young woman in a graduation gown, smiling. "She's here today," Melania said softly, "and she asked me to tell her mother's story, so she wouldn't be forgotten." And just then, the studio doors opened. Every camera turned. A young woman, no older than 20, stepped through the studio doors. Straight black hair, deep brown eyes, shoulders back, but her hands shook. Melania turned and opened her arms. The girl rushed forward, burying herself in Melania's embrace. Jasmine's hand went to her mouth. The girl turned to her, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Rosa." She paused, glancing toward the audience. "My mother never got a chance to speak, but I'm here because of people who did." Rosa pulled a folded photo from her pocket. "This is the last picture I have of her. taken in Melania's kitchen. She was smiling. I hadn't seen her smile like that in years. Tears rolled freely now, across Rosa's cheeks, down Jasmine's face, even from the moderator's eyes. She used to call me Mi Esperanza, my hope, Rosa said softly. She looked straight at Jasmine. Even the people you think you hate might be the reason someone like me gets a second chance. Jasmine blinked. She had no response, but Rosa wasn't finished. She reached into her own folder and pulled out something that would leave the entire studio in shock. Rosa held up a plain white envelope, creased at the corners, sealed tightly. "I wasn't going to do this," she said, voice shaking. "But my mother told me, if anyone ever tries to erase you, tell your story louder." She handed the envelope to the moderator. He opened it carefully and froze. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Spanish. He looked up, voice shaky. "It's from Sofia, dated 1 week before she died." Melania covered her mouth. The moderator read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't cry. I had a good life because of good people. Melania opened her home when she didn't have to. Rosa, if this letter reaches you, remind the world that kindness is stronger than cruelty." The studio was absolutely silent. Even Jasmine's face was soaked in tears now. Rosa stepped forward and gently placed the letter beside the mic. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said quietly, "you asked who Melania really is." She motioned to the letter. "She's the reason my mother didn't die nameless. And tonight she gave her voice back." But what Melania did next would leave even Rosa stunned. Melania stepped back toward the mic. Her face was calm, but her voice carried centuries. "Rosa shouldn't be standing here alone," she said. She reached into her folder and pulled out one last document, thicker than the others. "I didn't just give her mother a place to sleep. I filed for legal guardianship after Sofia died. I hired a lawyer, paid every fee, and stood in court beside her." Gasps echoed across the stage. The document was stamped and signed, "Legal Permanent Residency, Rosa Elena Soto." Rosa's mouth dropped open. "You didn't tell me," she whispered. Melania turned to her, tears brimming. "Your mother gave her life for you. I just made sure it wasn't in vain." Reporters typed furiously. The moderator looked visibly emotional. But Jasmine. She sat still, quietly shaken. Melania's voice grew stronger. "I may not have been born here, but I know what it means to belong. Not to a party, not to a flag, but to people." She turned, looking directly at Jasmine. "The question isn't whether I deserve to be here," she said. "The question is, do you still remember why you are?" And Jasmine finally stood up. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine stood stiffly, her palms clenched. But this time, she didn't speak with power. She spoke with pain. "I built my reputation fighting for the voiceless," she said, glancing toward Rosa. "I thought I was always on the right side of history." She looked at Melania. "But tonight, I made history for the wrong reasons." The air was still. "I judged you by a stereotype. I weaponized your past. And in doing so, I disrespected every woman who ever crossed a border with hope in her chest." Rosa's eyes softened. Jasmine looked directly into the camera. "To every immigrant watching tonight, I failed you. And I'm sorry." A pause. Then, Jasmine turned to Rosa. "If your mother were still alive, I think she'd be proud of you, of your strength, of the grace you showed, even to me." She reached out her hand. Rosa hesitated, then took it. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The moment didn't call for noise. It called for healing. But just as the moderator began to close the show, a voice from the back of the room broke the silence. "Wait!" a voice cried from the shadows of the audience. Everyone turned. A woman, tall, wearing a denim jacket and worn-out jeans, stepped into the light. I'm sorry, she stammered. I wasn't planning to speak, but I knew Sophia. Melania froze. Rosa clutched her chest. I met her at a shelter in Houston, 2003. She braided my daughter's hair when I was too sick to get out of bed. She gave me her last bowl of rice once. The woman's voice trembled. I didn't know she'd passed. I've been trying to find her daughter for years. She stepped forward slowly. I'm still undocumented, she said, tears in her eyes. But tonight, I don't feel invisible. Security looked nervous. The producers exchanged glances, but Melania walked over and took the woman's hand. You're not invisible, she said softly. You never were. The woman collapsed into her arms. Rosa walked over and joined them. 3 generations, 3 worlds, 1 story. The camera zoomed in. Viewers around the world were crying, but the most powerful moment was yet to come. No one expected the producers to allow it, but they did. A single empty chair was pulled forward under the studio lights. The undocumented woman who knew Sophia, her name was Alejandra, was asked to sit and speak. She hesitated. I don't speak perfect English, she whispered. Melania stepped beside her. You speak human. That's enough. Alejandra sat. Her hands trembled in her lap. She looked at Jasmine first. When you said what you said earlier, I felt like the girl I used to be, hiding in a laundry closet, afraid ICE would find me. I stopped feeling like a person that day. The studio was silent. Even Jasmine's breathing could be heard. But then tonight, you listened. You said sorry, and that healed something. Then she turned to Rosa. Your mother was my hero. Finally, she looked at Melania. You didn't save just Rosa. You saved people who never even met you. A pause. I have no papers, no money. But tonight, I felt like I finally had a name. The audience rose to their feet. But Melania, quietly, had one last surprise. Melania walked to center stage one final time. She looked at the moderator, then at the cameras. Tonight wasn't supposed to go this way, she said. It was just a debate. She held up one last folder. But I brought this, just in case. Inside, a full immigration sponsorship application, signed by her, addressed to Alejandra. Rosa gasped. Jasmine covered her mouth. I've spoken with lawyers, Melania said. She has grounds for asylum, and I have the resources to help. This isn't a political stunt. It's personal. She turned to Alejandra. If you'll let me, I want to stand with you in court. Alejandra broke down. She couldn't speak. She simply nodded and covered her face with both hands. Jasmine walked over, slowly, and hugged her. Then she reached for Melania's hand. I was wrong about you, she whispered. Melania simply replied, You were just early in your journey. Now you're here. The moderator cleared his throat, barely holding back tears. This debate was supposed to end in 90 minutes, he said. Instead, it started something none of us saw coming. And what happened when the cameras stopped made history. The lights dimmed. The crowd began to clear. But in the corner of the studio, Rosa, Melania, Jasmine, and Alejandra stood in a quiet circle, hands locked, eyes full. An NBC producer caught it on a final B-roll camera. No script, no applause, just real people holding one another. Later that night, the footage went viral with just 3 words. This is America. Across the internet, thousands of former immigrants shared their stories. Thousands more apologized for the labels they'd once thrown. And Jasmine? She didn't run from the moment. She scheduled her own press conference. I called someone an illegal, she said, but she showed me what it means to be legally human. Melania never tweeted about the moment, never gave another interview, but one photo surfaced days later. Rosa, in college, smiling, and on the desk beside her was Sophia's letter, framed. Sometimes debates divide, but sometimes they reveal the truth that politics forgets, that real power doesn't live in a microphone, it lives in compassion. If this story moved you, if it made you think, cry, or remember someone who stood up for you, please tap like to honor the memory of people like Sophia. Leave a comment sharing your story or someone who helped you feel seen, and subscribe. Because here, we tell the stories the world tries to silence. You never know. Your story might be the one that changes someone's life tomorrow. Thank you for watching.